and your lives.
We're back at House Education on April 23rd, 2023, continuing our discussion of a phone-free schools bill. We've been getting some testimony from all areas, but today we are welcoming somebody with some true expertise in sort of adolescent growth and behavior. Anyway, I'm going to turn it right over to you, Doctor, if you'd introduce yourself, and we'd love to hear what you have to say about phone-free schools.
Sure. Thank you so very much for having me. I wish I could be there in person. I'm actually out of state, but thrilled to be able to contribute to this. My name is Harris Strokoff. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist based in both South Burlington, Vermont, and also work at NCSS in St. Albans, Vermont. I've had the privilege of working with children, adolescents, and adults for most of the last 20 years. And in that time, I feel like I've really gotten a really clear view as to how things have changed as far as the types of issues that kids and teens have struggled with, and as all of you know, a lot of it has to do with these, and so happy to talk about some of the things that I've seen in my working with Vermont kids and teens, and also share what we know from national trends and studies as well. I've been talking to I'll also admit I'm a parent, and so it's very, very close to me as well. And I've been talking with a lot of schools, mostly in Franklin County, some in Chittenden County, talking to concerned parents, talking to educators, and one thing that's been wonderful has been how open people have been to learning more about the impact that screens have on not just education, but really emotional development as well for children, and how many, and just the fact that we're talking about it here shows just how far we've come in the last few years. I have a presentation that I've been giving to schools that usually takes up an hour. I've distilled it to some slides that I'm thinking I could share with you in 15 minutes or so, and I certainly these tend to be extremely conversational, and so I would love any questions, and or if you'd prefer to use this valuable time just to simply ask questions from the get-go, I'm happy with that as well. So whichever the committee would prefer.
Well, I think, why don't you go ahead, and our agenda has us taking a break at 10:30, but we can easily go beyond that, of course, depending on your availability.
Yep.
We certainly we don't want to shortchange your information. So why don't you sort of talk a little bit about your presentation, and then I just encourage the committee to raise your hands. I'll interrupt, and we can ask questions as we go along.
Hey, so what I'll do is I will share my screen here. One moment, please.
Meanwhile, during this pause, we will all sit here and fight the urge to look at our phones.
Absolutely.
There it is.
Okay. So as I mentioned, I work at an NCSS, and we certainly treat a lot of kids and families where social media and screens have certainly been playing a role in symptomatology. So one thing I like to bring people to know about is, there is a growing body of research when it comes to internet and gaming addiction. It is not officially in the DSM-5, but it was given a provisional diagnosis due to how many people, not just kids certainly, but adults have found that the addictive nature of video games and social media and the internet has caused problems for them. And one thing, I can tell you that I feel like I've seen it all. I mean, I think, I share with families and educators that, that I'm no saint, like anybody. I feel like I have at times in my life, I've had an unhealthy relationship with my phone where I feel like, I wish I would look at it less throughout the course of my life. And I think that's part of being a human now in 2025. What internet and gaming addiction is that that's when it gets to a point where it really causes consequences, such as, for instance, in an adult, job loss, relationship loss. In a child, I would certainly argue that school failure, certainly absenteeism from school is largely tied to life on screens in my experience. And one thing that we found with internet and gaming addiction is a lot of the same symptoms that we see in substance use disorders. Almost all the same symptoms we see in substance use disorders we see in internet and gaming addiction. That includes just an unhealthy preoccupation. It includes tolerance, whereas before, one could kind of get their needs met checking social media, maybe 10 minutes a day, and the next thing you know, it's 2 hours a day. Withdrawal, and I mentioned end stage here. In my work in Vermont over the last decade, I mean, I've seen cases where kids have ended up in emergency rooms due to severe aggression when they're kind of parted from their devices at times, and so we certainly see all the signs and symptoms of addiction. Impact on education. I know these slides are shared. University of Chicago did a study that I thought was rather well done, that showed that even a student who has their smartphone turned off on their desk did not perform as well as if they didn't have it there. And it just speaks to how much we think about our life through our phone and how distracting that can be, let alone if it was turned on. And the more that people identified themselves as being addicted to their phones, the more striking that impact was. And so again, even just having the phone off has an impact on education. A lot of what I hope to talk about today is the impact of internet and phone use in the classroom. I mean, this is multifaceted. I know you've heard from experts that are educators, and a number of other experts that I saw. But it is impossible for us to focus when we're distracted by what largely is a preferable activity. Kids would rather look at their phones than pay attention to what's going on in class. And it's just very clear that it impacts education. And even as important as its impact on education, there's the impact on social and emotional development. For many kids, especially from more marginalized groups, being in school may be the only time that they get to be around other kids in a pro-social environment, face to face. Because many kids, the moment they get home, they're on screens until they sleep and when they wake up. And what we know is that it's critical for social and emotional development to experience the back and forth of being human, and thus even being able to use one's phone in between classes is very detrimental. There's something I call the hours in a day effect. It has different names, but basically it's about what I was just speaking about just now, and that there are certain things that humans have evolved to require in order to come out optimal humans, and that is learning how to connect with other humans face to face, learning how to be curious, learning how to think about what one may want to do without things being suggested to them virtually all the time. Developing a connection with the earth, with nature, developing a connection with our bodies through exercise. These are all things that we know are paramount for preventing things like depression and substance use disorders, whatnot. We are beginning to see, in my opinion, what some of the outcomes are from persons who kind of are devoid of these things, devoid of these beneficial relationships when they hit young adulthood. Among other things, I think I predict, unfortunately, that it's probably going to lead to an increase in disability in humans, due to inability to tolerate different things, and also screen addiction leading to absenteeism from school and from work, etc. So talked about this, and this is just I share this screen with parents a lot because it highlights that not only is it specific social media apps, but even group texting can be a significant source of drama, of feeling left out for children, of bullying, etc. We know that depression and suicidality have been increasing in our teens and youth and young adults. And it very much seems to be tied to social media use. As far as why that is, there are a number of reasons. Cyberbullying certainly happens. We compare ourselves to others on social media, whether we are conscious of it or not, and it can make people certainly feel less than and increase anxiety and stress. Plus, much like cable news, it leads to the consumption or overconsumption of negative and depressing content, and usually it's veiled in something that might look cool to a teen or young adult initially, but then further kind of getting into what is given to these kids and teens via social media. Things tend to get negative because negativity keeps eyeballs on it. So did I click that? Yes. There's a graph I'd like to share here. There it is. This is a graph that shows a percentage of U.S. high school students who felt sad or hopeless or had suicidal thoughts in the last year. And this is a few years old at this point. And what we see, so the sad and hopelessness percentage of high school students is in blue. Suicidality in high school students is in red. We can see that it seemed like things were trending to be improved for a while, and then there was a large spike and a continued upward trajectory. When first showing this to parents and educators, many saw this graph and before looking at dates thought, oh, that must be COVID that really worsened things. But actually, it's 2009 where we really start to see this worsening trend, and that's obviously well before COVID. What that is, though, is that's the advent of when smartphones became ubiquitous and Facebook really started to take hold, and so social media impact. And I think back historically, there was nothing else really societally jarring in 2009 that I would attribute to this for our kids and teens. Okay. This is a report from a little over a year ago that showed that frequent social media use led to higher risks for teens. This is a CDC report. Basically, significant increased risk of being bullied the more time one spends on social media. And that could be being bullied through social media, or it could be being bullied at school or whatnot due to what one is posting on social media or posted about them on social media. And also, this CDC report showed a 50% increased risk of suicidality amongst the heavier social media users in teenagers. Okay, I believe this has been shared in testimony before, and it's it's Surgeon General's advisory in May 2023, where Dr. Murty really spelled out, I thought very eloquently, the risks that social media has on kids. One thing that I see, and I alluded to this earlier, is kind of I feel like we're starting to see what some of the impact is on young adults. It's something that I've seen described as existential depression. There are many different types of depression that we treat as psychiatrists. Some are, really just what I call biological, where we really don't see many risk factors, but oftentimes it's either known or unknown genetics that can lead to major depression at times, that we treat. Sometimes we see depressive disorders that are very much genetically passed down. Sometimes we see depressive disorders that are very much in part due to trauma and life stress. What I see in these cases of existential depression are when kids become young adults without the appropriate identity formation. And oftentimes, that happens when kids maybe they're occupied in their childhood and their teenage years, and they're occupied in a virtual world, playing games, doing everything through a screen, and they're satisfied. Largely at that time, they're kids, they're getting their needs met, they're playing video games, having fun, and then oftentimes it isn't until these kids reach 20 years old, 18 years old, 24 years old, when they realize, oh, wait, there are other kids my age that are able to do things that I'm not able to do. They're able to ask hard questions. They're able to put themselves out there and maybe even be rejected. They're able to apply for a job. They're able to work. They're able to show up in life. And that can then lead to a different type of depression, where kids have not experienced real novelty seeking and gained accomplishment outside of say a video game, if you will. And that's certainly hard to treat. This is a link to a study. This is from about 5 months ago or so, that actually looked at, if I remember correctly, it was college students on break, and how much social media they were using. And basically what it showed is that the more these teenagers, or I guess it was teenagers, the more these teenagers used social media, the less social they actually were. And what that means is the more hours one reported being on social media, the less conversations they had with humans throughout that same period. So I thought that was pretty fascinating, in that we call it social media, but at least in this case, and probably in many cases, it substitutes for truly being social in how most of us think about it. So what can we do? And that brings us to the work that you're doing, and I'm so happy that you are. One is educating students about this issue, educating parents about this issue. There's a link to this. This is actually a 2018 article, and that's when people started to notice that there's a digital divide when it comes to schools. And this is something else that has made me really passionate about this issue, in that it truly is an equity issue, in that parents that have means, parents that have higher levels of education, are able to engineer screen-free opportunities for their kids. Maybe it's sending their kid to private school, which around the country, that has been a large reason when asked why parents do choose to send their kids to private schools. It's because of how much their kids are on Chromebooks, or their peers, or even their own children are on cell phones during school. Parents with means can afford tutoring to make up for maybe learning loss due to having screens in schools. Parents with means can engineer other activities such as sleepaway camps, athletics, etc. Whereas more marginalized kids don't. Parents with means know how to put a child's phone on lockdown, so that their children are not accessing their phone at school, and they can check and make sure that isn't the case. A new American may struggle with knowing how to do that, or may not even know that's possible, may not even know that's an issue. And so I certainly see this being an equity issue. I also talk about modeling, how it's important for us parents, us adults, to model appropriate technology use, and most importantly, time not using technology. And the last or the third bullet is schools stepping in. In 2022 or 2022, 2023, it was still pretty new. And I remember even 2 years ago giving talks, there weren't many examples of Vermont schools saying, we don't want smartphones in our school. The first places to do it at scale that I know of were in the Bay Area, which is ironic in that that's where the technology was developed. But I believe it was either San Mateo, I think it was San Mateo School District was at the time the largest school district to ban smartphones in 2023. And most of the time when schools do this, certainly kids may groan initially, but most of the time when asking kids in these schools 2 or 3 weeks later, they're unconcerned about it, and many report that it improves their education in their school life. So that's why we're here. And just some other things, this is kind of a newer term that's being used called digital dementia, and this applies to us adults certainly. The more the time that we spend on screens scrolling, it can actually impact our memory. And these articles speak to certain studies that are being done looking at populations where smartphones are not ubiquitous, and are they better at remembering certain details, names, etc., than those of us in our more developed technological societies. Again, mentioning that I feel very fortunate and hopeful that the pendulum is swinging back, and we're starting to realize, some of the negative impacts that screens are having on our development. Obviously, technology has great promise. As a physician, I know that it already has helped with medical breakthroughs. It's going to help with many more medical breakthroughs. We're fine. It is even going to have some beneficial impacts on education. And I think that, really developing the balance as far as our children are concerned is of paramount importance. So that's me speeding through my presentation. I'm now going to attempt to stop my screen sharing.
Great. Thank you. The other day, we had folks from Harwood Union High School testify, and kids and the principal. And what was, to me, kind of amazing is just in terms of the data they keep in terms of scores and attendance and all of that, there was a pretty immediate impact in a positive direction once they banned cell phones. And I'm just wondering if there's data out there, if enough schools have sort of done this at this point. Is there enough national data or local data that sort of says, yeah, in fact, what they found at Harwood is backed up by national data?
That's a great question. The data that I found shows that decreasing use decreases stress, on attendance, on school performance. I wish I had looked. I'm not certain, but I can tell you anecdotally. I've heard from individual students. I've heard from teachers. I've heard from families who, I've yet to hear anyone have anything negative to say about it, except for in certain cases where parents are really anxious about maybe their children's anxious condition, where the parent feels like they need to be able to contact their child.
I think what was also amazing about the testimony we received from Harwood folks and Thetford is that everybody adjusted just fine.
Yeah.
It was fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Representative Brady.
First, thanks. I appreciate your pointing out the equity issue. This is percolating for me as you hear. I think even if we look at what Vermont schools are doing it now, I think we're starting to see that. Harwood, Thetford, CBU, certainly not entirely, but I do think that there's some more affluent communities and parents and active parents that are pushing it in certain places. And as we look at the state as a whole, that concerns me that we would, that there would be kind of disparate application if we think this is what is good for kids. And I can see that sort of parent advocates are maybe more having more of an impact in certain districts. So I appreciate raising that. I think it's something we need to really consider as a committee. But my question is more from the clinical side. When you hear the medical exemptions or students might need a phone to deal with, I was a high school teacher, have heard this, from students or parents or even special educators at times, need the phone to help to be able to do check-ins with parents to manage anxiety, or need to be able to listen to music to sort of tune out excess stimulation. And obviously I know you can't case by case maybe, but I wonder from sort of the medical side, how you address that or think about that. I'm sure you've heard those arguments made or those concerns raised.
I certainly have, and in my experience, and obviously, I can't speak to every case, but probably 95% of the time, that anxious condition that the child has would be improved by having the inability to check in. Most of the time, a key tenet of a psychotherapeutic treatment for anxiety disorders, it's in cognitive behavioral therapy, which is the type of therapy that's most likely to improve any type of anxious or even depressive disorder in kids and teens, is exposure, is being able to be exposed to discomfort, and also being in therapy and being able to practice what we can do when we're feeling that discomfort. And maybe it's a mantra, maybe it's a deep breathing, progressive muscle relaxation, maybe it's even getting support from the school, therapist. But most of the time, the therapist and certainly the psychiatrist would not recommend such an exemption. And would not recommend such an exemption because it can actually interfere with treatment and therapy. Sometimes we hear like, oh, my child doesn't need that next level of treatment because I can just check in with them all the time. But that's not sustainable. And then that actually can lead to avoidance of using those psychotherapeutic tools that can help make one better and help decrease their risk for worsening symptoms and disability in the future. So my hope is that most of my colleagues in the helping field will really think 2 or 3 or 4 times before signing an exemption. Now there are certain cases, for instance, like, obviously one example is like, let's say someone has profound autism or intellectual disability and they need a device to speak and communicate, of course. Or maybe it's part of one's treatment plan where the only way this child can get to school is if they're afforded 2 check-ins per day or something. If it's with a therapist who's signing off on it, then maybe. But most of the time, I think most of my colleagues would agree that it's usually it's the parent wanting to help, but most of the time it's not the recommended thing.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This might be more of a question for Peter, but you were talking about how sort of that affluent ability to choose how your kids spend their time. Does our cell phone bill, if it passed, would that cover like state funded summer camps, like the kinds that happen? Because that's one of the things I was thinking about, is I realized I actually signed my kids up for weeks of summer camp just to keep them off screens.
Yeah.
And so like, how can we also make that something we can provide?
Yeah, I think what we're trying to do is just one piece of the puzzle, and that is to give kids a 6-hour break from all of this stuff.
Right.
And maybe that leads over into their life outside where they start realizing, oh, I don't need to be on my phone all the time.
But I was thinking like, we do actually provide some state funded summer opportunities for kids. That wouldn't be covered in this?
It would not, but they're of course all welcome to have their own rules.
Yeah.
The part of this bill that I don't struggle with because I'm now feeling a real urgency here, but if we did nothing, a lot of this would happen anyway, because it's sort of spreading like a wildfire. But I think that it'll start getting into all facets of things like after-school programs or summer learning programs.
There's a record amount of money in the after-school
That's right.
fund and dedicated campus. It's a separate policy issue and discussion for another time.
Any other questions from the committee? Great. That's really helpful and it's great to get your perspective on all of this. Thanks very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I mentioned I'm extremely appreciative for your committee. We've been waiting for this and thinking about what this is going to mean, not just for kids now, but for future generations. It will be incredibly positive. So thanks again. I really appreciate it.
So committee, we'll just be on break until 11.
11 is